idea I've come across is that when there's a shortage, that's when you innovate. The Industrial Revolution took place in Britain because there was a shortage of labour rather than in France where there was a surplus of labour. Europe now has a shortage of energy, and I believe there will be an energy revolution in Europe driven by the fact that we're short of it. We're going to have to think more originally and more creatively than anyone else in the world will be thinking because they have it in more abundant supply.
Well, I think the best economic idea is actually to face up to the fundamental issue, which is food shortage, that we're going to be very short of food unless we do something about it, and that's about the globalized world we live in, and that knocks on to everything else that we're dealing with. And I think the comment made today, which was most important, was to say everything is connected with everything else. We really have become far too siloed in looking at things like climate change, things like food shortages, resource restrictions, the energy problems that we have, and these are all part of the same picture of a world which has become a global family with very large numbers of people to feed.
Building the digital single market would be a huge economic opportunity. That would help us to get out of this fiscal crisis. That would be able to provide sufficient growth and also to create the jobs that we need in the future.
Well, the best idea I've heard today is all about energy and focusing, as John Gummer has said, much more about dealing with our own energy problems by reducing the waste of energy. And his statistics are dramatic. If they're true, that's what we need to do something about. And that is what feeds through into so many unexpected side results. I talked about the way in which food prices, because of the energy costs that go into them, that is one of the real triggers of the Arab Spring. The people there who are unemployed and hungry are absolutely going to take political action. Throw the rascals out, as we say in the UK.
What we need is open borders, liberalisation of the labour markets. We need to get rid of the closed shops, and I think on that basis, completion of the single market, on that basis, in the next 20 years could be a fantastic opportunity.
We're getting a really unpleasant north-south divide that we're going to have to work doubly hard at, because parties in the north are now producing votes for the far right and making it impossible politically for the countries of the north to show the levels of solidarity that are intellectually and emotionally necessary.
For me, the most important element in the global economy today is to have a coordinated response internationally to international issues. We badly need that in Europe in terms of the financial crisis which we have at the moment, where the European institutions and member states are not coordinating and sending out succinct, clear and coherent messages.
What we have seen during the crisis is that we did not have enough Europe, contrary to the opinion held by some that we had too much Europe. If we would not have had the European Union, the situation would be much worse in most countries, and what we see is that the flaws of not having enough Europe is creating havoc in some segments of the market.
The phrase I actually like most, and I'm ashamed to say this because it's one of my own phrases and it only came to me while we were in the plenary, which is this sense of the squeezed south, that Spain, Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Malta, whatever, are being squeezed simultaneously by the currency crisis. They're squeezed by the environment crisis, because they are going to be countries where we need a major revolution in what they produce under the common agricultural policy, and they're also in the front line of the migration crisis. And just at the time when we need them to be at their most creative in contributing what must be the main part to a new relationship, a Eurabia relationship across the Mediterranean, they're under massive political, economic and climate pressures.
The economic governance inside Europe is not sufficiently strong. If we have transferred and pooled sovereignty in the monetary area and we do not have a political union, then we must have much stronger a framework in in economic governance, and not only focused on the fiscal side, but also on macroeconomic coordination and in areas which still belong to the national sovereignty.
The challenge for Europe now is to turn that into a real force for good, which can be turned to our advantage in the long run.
The European Union should be both more generous in terms of financial aid, market access, facilitation of visa, but at the same time more frank in conditioning its aid to those countries with significant and continuing progress in building democratic institutions.
We are now talking about turning the crisis into an opportunity so that Japan will have renewal in its economy, and I think that's sort of experience will certainly be shared by Europe.
Without the European Union, there would be no voice for any of the individual countries in the world, and we would have a world which would be a carve-up between the United States and whoever happens to be the most powerful nation in the emerging world. And so it would be United States and China, and I believe that Europe has an ongoing and continuing role to play, and Britain should be playing an active part in that.
In fact, I concentrated on the questions of the interactions between demography, economic development and environmental issues in the Arab world, and I think that the European Union should be both more generous in terms of financial aid, market access, facilitation of visa, but at the same time more frank in conditioning its aid to those countries with significant and continuing progress in building democratic institutions.
You cannot deal with everything at once, so you have to break it down, but you can't deal with any of the bits without seeing them as part of the whole. And I think it's a question not so much of organizational change as personal and organizational attitudes. We've just got to ask ourselves, every time we break things down, what does that mean to the whole? Every time we look at the whole, what does that mean to the parts? And that's one of the problems we've had in the European Union. We've never realized that there's no conflict between growing unity in Europe and the individual contributions of each nation. You can grow both, but you've got to grow both if you're going to make both successful.
We need to look very carefully at the common agricultural policy. What do we grow ourselves? What should we grow ourselves? What can we buy from the Maghreb region, for example, an obvious one? What can we help them with the aid of loans and grants and so on? What can we help them develop for themselves so they can then export to us rather than we waste a lot of money on the common agricultural policy?
It will cost us much more to go to war in places like Libya than to prevent the eruption of such conflicts by being more generous in the first place. And in fact, their prosperity and our prosperity are profoundly interlinked.